Welcome to the Morning Prep Podcast. We've got a minute because the kids have not started to line up yet. I am your host, Nathan Van. So I was listening to another podcast by ASCD. It's the textbook, well, no, they're not quite a textbook company, but it's the education company that they like to release a number of books that focus in on different educational topics and ideas. And if you're a certified teacher who went through the traditional means of getting your certification through the whole college means and everything like that, you no doubt own a couple of books by them. But they release a podcast and they like to do interviews with their authors. And one was talking about empathy. And I know we've talked about this on the show before. But the thing is, I keep on coming back to it because I believe it's something that's so critically important, both when you're in the classroom, but especially during COVID, just simply because there's the simple question of you don't know what every person is going through. You don't know exactly what other people are dealing with. And what this does for me is it makes me really think about the whole what's going on in these 2 weeks. It's the beginning of winter break. That's when I'm recording this, right at the start of winter break. And I'm just going over in my head of what are my students experiencing? What are they feeling? What are they thinking? What's happening? And one thing that always comes to my mind are the students that I know for a fact have a more challenging home life. They typically, maybe some of them, they have a larger family, and so resources are stretched a little thin. And so sometimes Christmas isn't always the best time of year for them. And I always think back to recognizing what can I do in my own classroom to make things a little bit better for them. What's interesting is I was talking with my boss about this, and he was sharing a story of at a previous school that he worked at, there was 8 fights on the last day of school. He was saying that the teachers were just thoroughly exhausted and that the kids, you can tell, were just stressed out completely. And they just started to ask, well, why today of all days, the last day before break? Why are you fighting? And what they started to really realize from the kids is that this more or less was their response to the fact that that school was a safe place for them, that it was a place that they wanted to be, that it was a place that they felt that care, that love, that compassion. And it's not to say that their parents don't provide that for them. We know some of their parents don't provide that for them, regrettably and horribly, but we also know that, school presents that level of consistency and that care and that structure that honestly kids so deeply crave. Again, I can't say this enough. Kids crave structure. So going into the rest of this break, and again, if you're thinking back to the last episode, I'm thinking back to the last episode that I recorded. I gave a little bit of homework that said, follow the schedule that I gave. And I really hope that you are doing that. And by the time that you listen to this episode, I hope that you're starting to set your mind back into that work mode of getting ready for the year. And I've got just 3 things that I really want you to think about and prepare for as you are beginning to reset your classroom for semester 2. So before we dive into that, let's just take a quick word for a sponsor. So thank you for taking a moment just to listen to this little sponsored pitch. What we're going to be focused on for this little ad is something that you may not have heard of, which is Anchor.fm. Now, truth be told, have you had that killer idea for a podcast? Then Anchor.fm is your way to go. So what makes Anchor so good is the fact that it, first and foremost, it is free. That's actually what attracted me to it in the first place, was the fact that it was a zero financial investment. But the second piece is that there are creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. So if you don't want to fiddle with any sort of GarageBand or Traction or Waveform or any other recording program like that, I only named the ones that I knew off the top of my head, then you can do it right through the computer, right through your browser. Also, what Anchor likes to do is distribute your podcast for you so you can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and many, many more. What also makes it phenomenal is the fact that you can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. All right? No minimum. So you can start making money immediately. Now, the thing is that it is everything that you need to make a podcast in one place. So download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm and get started. So the first thing that I really want you to consider when it comes to the start of semester 2 and how to set up your classroom and just get ready for it is, what are ways that you can very intentionally create empathy for your students or build that sense of empathy. And for me, the first step of building empathy is really getting to know a person authentically, who they are as an individual. Now, I know some teachers are really, really strong at this, they're able to pinpoint things about their kids. But one thing that I know across the board for everybody is that remote learning makes that significantly more difficult. When you're able to rotate around a classroom or circulate a classroom, you're able to see very clearly like some tics that students have and ways to pinpoint what their strengths are and what their weaknesses are and how to support them. And it's a lot more difficult, obviously, in this remote setting. And so the first thing that I want you to consider is, how can you actually get to know your kids on a deeper level? And I've got just two simple ideas. One idea is call home, talk to their parents. Ask their parents about them. Give their parents updates about how they're doing in your class. That's honestly like your window into your students' world is their parents. So you can start there. And I know that their parents would absolutely love to hear from you and would love to tell you more about who their kids are. And you can always frame it in the context of, I'm trying to improve my classroom, and by learning more about who they are, their classroom is going to get better. But the second way to do that is also go to the source, ask the kids. And when you talk to them, find out like, well, what did you do over break? Why did you choose to do those things over break? What was one thing that you wish you could have done that you didn't do? And things along those lines. But getting to know your kids, I think that's the first step to really changing your classroom culture, both remotely and in person. So again, have that empathy, get to know who they are, talk to them, talk to their parents. The second way is to improve your classroom and to really set yourself up for a very strong second semester is creating systems of positivity in your classroom. Create spaces where you can celebrate the accomplishments of kids. I say this and I emphasize this is because when I thought about my own classroom, I always had to fight against that tendency to be the angry teacher, because we all had that one teacher who was just angry and grouchy all the time and yelled all the time and was just a horrible person to be around, essentially. And I had to fight against that because there were many points in my own career where I just dove right into that, where I was tired, I was exhausted, I was angry, and like everything that a student did, I only focused on the ways that I could punish them and punitive measures. And I found out it wasn't healthy. It was stressful for me, it was stressful for them, and it didn't set my classroom up to be a place of rigorous learning. And so I had to really restructure the way that I did things. And again, especially in COVID, especially in remote learning, that you're limited. You've got the camera issue, you've got muting, you've got just kids not turning in work. Like, you've got a lot of things that are working against you. So you need to figure out a way to make your classroom much more positive. One way to do that is just focus in on opportunities for growth. And so think about, what are the things that you wish that you could see consistently in your classroom, and you reward those behaviors. Sometimes those rewards come in the name of just positively saying like, hey, this is great. I see Jeremiah, he's got his camera on and I can see that he is engaged with the work. And I know he's going to have an excellent grade on this assignment. And sometimes it just takes congratulating a kid like that to slowly see other kids pop their cameras on and start, again, doing those things that you want to do. And it goes the same way again. And like, think about like, what are the 3 things that you wish your classroom could be like? And you need to really begin to structure and positively reinforce those things that you want to see. If you only ever talk about the bad, honestly, that's all you're ever only going to see is just the bad. So structure your classroom in a much more positive way. the third thing to really think about, to really set your classroom up for semester 2, is what are ways that you can make your classroom a more rigorous environment? Because again, it's great to know your kids. It's great to be empathetic with them. It's great to have that, allow them to have that buy-in with you just because they feel like you care about them, which obviously you do. But also like that nature of positivity. Again, like you have a very positive classroom space, but all of that to one extent becomes meaningless if they're not learning anything. So after you've developed those relationships further, after you've created the systems to make your classroom a much more positive space, you need to find ways in which to make your classroom a more rigorous space too. You want to make your classroom a place where students are learning. You want to make it a place where they're growing. That's what's key and that's what's important. Obviously, that's why they're in school. The empathy and the positivity are there to get them to buy into the classroom so that you can ask them to do very hard and very challenging things. And so one way to make and improve your rigor in your classroom is the way that you are planning. Now, again, you may have heard this 1,000 times before, but I'm going to emphasize this one key point. The one major way to make your classroom more rigorous is to have your assessment already made and to plan from the assessment that you created. And so what I mean by that is after you've built and designed your end of unit or your end of week or your summative, to one extent, your summative assessment, you break that up into what are the skills students need to know, and then you teach them those skills and you have them practice those skills, and then so slowly grow to that level that you want them to be. I find that classrooms that have low amounts of rigor are pretty much cutting themselves off at the ankles because they're not actually starting from a place of where the assessment is. Like they don't have an assessment. They build the assessment afterwards, after they think about like, well, what did I teach about? What did I teach to them? What skills did they practice? Things like that. And they end up having a very low rigor assessment. And those are always the harder conversations to have because it's a matter of like, well, you really didn't teach your kids a whole lot. And because you weren't planned from the beginning, you didn't know where they were going. So I just want to really conclude with this. Again, when you're thinking about preparing for semester 2, you want to, again, find ways in which to learn more about your students, really get to know who they are as people so that, again, they get to buy into you some more. You want to create your classroom to be a space of positivity. You want it to be that place that they want to be at. All right. And then the last piece is that you want your classroom to be a rigorous place. So what are the ways you can build empathy? What are the ways you can build positivity? What are the ways you can build rigor? We discussed ways to do that. And if you go on the Facebook page, I'm going to post that question and I want you to engage in that. I want you to really think, like, what are the ways that you are going to do that in your own classroom? So be sure to follow and like us on Facebook at the Morning Prep Pod. And if you have a question or an episode idea to suggest, please send an email to morningpreppod@gmail.com. So this was the Morning Prep Podcast. This bell is about to ring, and I will see you in the classroom.